Yes, thank you, and welcome back to the studio. We're here with a very special guest. This is a vocational archaeologist based out of Clayton, New York. Ken, welcome to the studio. We appreciate.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate being here.
And when I first heard what your title was, I was very curious. What is a vocational archaeologist?
Well, as opposed to a professional archaeologist, which has gone through schooling and I was basically trained alongside professional archaeologists and have spent my lifetime basically on the subject, and worked with area archaeologists to found the local New York State Archaeological Association chapter, Thousand Islands chapter, and things like that. So it's kind of something you develop over time to be able to call yourself one of those, because I've had some training, so to speak, versus just somebody that just doesn't know anything at all and just out there to help.
And educate me a little bit, because I'm from Massachusetts. So educate me a little bit about the history of Northern New York. We were talking a little bit before the cameras were rolling, but educate me a little bit.
Well, the history in Jefferson County really can stretch right back to 13,000 years plus. At that point in time, most of the county, other than Tug Hill and the area around Fort Drum, was underwater from a glacial lake. But my colleague, Dr. Rush, identified a culture on that shoreline, building boats and living there. So right from that period on down until maybe 500 years ago, we have a really, really rich heritage of Native American activities here. Throughout that time, it's pretty much a continuum. I mean, there's places where we don't have all the holes filled in the archaeological record, but pretty much it's been a heavily occupied landscape for the last 13,000 years.
Tell me a little bit more about the Native American history here in New York.
Yeah, well, pretty much everything here we consider ancestral to the Haudenosaunee people, which are the Iroquoian people, Five Nations people. Haudenosaunee, of course, is their term for themselves, which is the people of the Longhouse. So we consider all the folks here ancestral to them. And so in many ways, we view it as a continuum versus just a series of different cultures that came in here. But the Iroquoian culture is the one people are most familiar with. And in our area, that sort of fell off the map, so to speak, around 500 years ago for a variety of reasons. Too long to get into. But that whole time, our area has been richly inhabited by folks that really, what I see as an archaeologist is that they've basically from 13,000 years ago up until the Iroquoian era, they were all living in the same locations on the shorelines, coastlines, and harvesting massive amounts of marine resources, things like this. So that's really the core of all of the cultural continuum up here, is our coastal environment, or archaeologists would call a littoral environment.
What does that mean?
That is just a technical term for coastal, right? means everything for a certain distance in from the coast, which is affected directly by the coast. So it's just a broad term for freshwater coastline, in terms of that. So it's not a term I use often just because it's an oddbally. And I do a lot of public speaking, so I try to use more normal terms like the kind I use in my everyday life, but.
Yeah, you were telling me before you came in here, you were just doing a public speaking event in Clayton. Talk about your public speaking.
Well, that's one of the activities I do besides research, is I try to raise a public awareness of how in-depth and rich the heritage was up around this area for Native Americans. People don't often think about it. I mean, we really celebrate our last few hundred years of history, but there's 13,000 years of history people just are not aware of. So I like to raise awareness, so I get people thinking about it and stuff, because it's another way for me in my work with nations to help protect and preserve these cultural resources. That's kind of a lot of what I like to do. But anyway, I just came from a talk in Clayton, and basically this, I do a lot of them every year. I'll be doing a boat tour, and I'm doing a talk in Lyme next weekend. So I do a lot of these talks, and it is really about opening people's eyes up, and people are really fascinated with the subject, because really you don't think about that. Everybody loves our landscape, right? You always, especially out on the river, you're like, this is my secret spot, and you think, oh, nobody's ever. somebody was there for thousands of years ago just checking that same spot out and loving it. So we do all have this common bond across time. Even though I'm not Native American, I was greatly disappointed by my ancestry test that showed 0. But yeah, no, we do have this bond across time, right? That we all love this piece of landscape up here, and I think that's what people connect to, I think.
It's the landscape that like connects us together.
Yeah, it is, and I'm from the flavor of archaeology, for lack of a better term, called a landscape archaeologist, where I view everything from the viewpoint of the landscape. To me, the landscape tells you everything. It tells me how the people were living, where they were living, et cetera, all the resources, et cetera. That's really where I come from and look at it. And the trick to landscape archaeology is you need to be able to look at the landscape and go backwards in time and see that landscape and what it must have looked like 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. And that is kind of an art form in many ways, but that's something that's maybe difficult to do, but for me, it's just the way my mind works. I want to know. So just kind of things I've picked up over time.
And you're a wealth of knowledge. It sounds like from just talking with you right now. You've been doing this for, you told me, 50 years now.
Yeah.
And you said you're working on a book. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's kind of a collaboration between. It started off as sort of a joke, but it's a collaboration between some fellow archaeologists, colleagues, because in doing these talks, and when you ask some of my colleagues that do these kinds of talks, the number one question you get after a talk is people like, okay, I'm really pumped about, where's the book? What's the book? Where can I read this book? And it's like, you're like, there isn't a book. There's a book that talks a little bit about it. There's this, there's that, there's no book. So one of the goals over the last several years and going on forward is to put together a tabletop book that kind of that a person can just have on their tabletop and just read, my gosh, this was the 13,000 year history we have here. And, have some images that really drive it home. Like, I mean, it's hard to imagine that 13,000 years ago, somebody was on the shoreline, which is at 600 feet sea level, right? They're building boats and looking across a frozen lake. I mean, and glaciers may really have been in the distant horizon still. And that's just like, wow, to think about, So we've had some amazing periods of time up here, and it fascinates me. So
It's fascinating me right now, just hearing like everything you're talking about and describing. I want to know, where can people go to learn more about this type of stuff?
Well, I do have a website that has a little bit of stuff on it, just stuff I've written up. It's kennethknapp.academia.edu. And if you look on the site, academia.edu, you can find stuff there. It's a free site. And, if you search terms like St. Lawrence Iroquoian, you'll come up with stuff. So there's a variety of things out there, some papers, articles from journals, things like this, but it's really tough to find that one thing that kind of lays out the whole story of it. There's a book, a big, massive book by a colleague, Dr. Ben Ford. It's called it's basically more about Lake Ontario, but it's basically, the name of it is The Shore is a Bridge, right? And that's a term because most people think of water as like a barrier to travel, but in reality it's a bridge. And he goes into in depth about a lot of this early culture. But it's a big book that goes right into historic times, so it's probably a heavy read for folks. But we're working on getting those resources, just something so people can, have something they could read through and basically cite, this is where this information came from, so somebody could look at the back of the book and go, okay, if I really want to get down and dirty, I can look that up, that kind of thing. And right now, the place I just did the talk in the Thousand Islands Museum in Clayton, I just helped them set up a big display of materials from a local collector at the turn of the last century, Jack Carter, which is very informative. It has a big range of time periods, so if folks want to really look at something, there's that. I have a display of materials from our archives in DePauville Free Library. also on display. Those materials represent a few different collections from people, and my family history starts back in 1900 thereabouts, because my grandfather is one of these early collectors. So my earliest childhood memories are running up the stairs in Bishop Street at 4 years old to get to Grandpa's artifact room, where I'd spend all day until they dragged me out. So that's early start, but
You never start too early with this type of stuff.
no,
it sounds
no.
like.
Although some have accused me of having a disease in this, regards, because I was taking my kids out when they were in diapers out to sites working on stuff. So
Now, we've covered a lot of ground in this
Mm-hmm.
interview. I'm curious, is there anything else you would like to add?
just that, we have a really, really rich Native American history here, and I'm always looking for ways to raise awareness. And I think, it's a kind of a journey of exploration for people to take, just in trying to track down information, trying to find places where you can see things. I think probably the Historical Society still has some stuff on display. It's a great journey to start off on, and we're trying to get you more information out there to the public, but it's really pretty exciting to think about. Let's move beyond the last few hundred years and look at this 13,000-year history. It's absolutely amazing. There was time periods that you can't imagine. Our area up here has gone through such change. We had this glacial lake. The ocean at one time was down in Ogdensburg. People were seal hunting there. Followed quickly by a time and period 10,000 years ago when Lake Ontario was landlocked. From Cape Vincent, you had to go miles to get to the shore. St. Lawrence flowed backwards. All these events, people were here though.
That's got to be so satisfying to discover, too.
Any of this is, you talk to the most seasoned archaeologists in the world, when they pull out something out of the ground after carefully excavating everything, they can't wipe the grin off their face because it's exciting, right? You've got something that just tells you a story. And this area has a big, big story that's just yet to be told. There's constantly change happening in archaeology, and every other day a new paper comes out that alters things a little bit. So everything's like a moving piece. So there's a lot of that. And really just to write up all the material and all of the activities and all the notes essentially into a field report for a site, it's a bit of work to do. That's why most archaeologists do it for a living, because somebody will pay them to do that. I don't do that for a living. It's more for here, and actually I have a deep connection with the Native American nations. I work with them pretty closely, helping them recover Native American remains and also researching older sites to allow them to file claims for repatriation.
Well, Ken, this has been awesome to talk with you. I'm really looking forward to this book that you will make soon at some point.
Yes, as soon as I can.
A pleasure having you in
Yep.
the studio, and thank you so much for your time.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.